Good morning, church. You are welcome to take your seats. My name is Glyn Norman. I am one of the pastors here. When I was about 23 years old, so just a few years ago, I was really considering very seriously whether God was calling me into full-time ministry. And I remember distinctly this one event that happened. I used to live in a town called Herne Bay, which you probably haven't heard of, Canterbury, you may have heard of, in England, and I worked in Folkestone. That was a bit of a drive every morning. It was about 17 or 18 miles drive, and most of it was through rural country roads if you took the shortcut, which I did. And as I was praying, I was driving and praying at the same time with my eyes open. I know it's not quite as spiritual, but it is a heck of a lot safer. So I was driving and praying at the same time saying, God, give me a sign that you want me to be in ministry. Make it just so unmistakably clear. And this sounds like a joke, and it sounds like I'm making it up, but no word of a lie, right in the middle of the road ahead of me was a lost sheep. I mean, there was one sheep, not a whole, whatever, pack, herd, gather, flock. Thank you. More coffee for the pastor. Bring the coffee. So, a flock of sheep. It wasn't a flock. There was just this one sheep that was right in the middle of the road, and other cars were like driving around it. And I was like, oh, there's a lost. That's very funny. So I stopped my car, and not all sheep are very happy to be caught. Did you know this? Those of you that have had a lot of experience with sheep. So I eventually managed to grab hold of this sheep, and it was a bit of a heavy sheep, and I took it and eventually walked over to the field where the rest of the sheep were, and I threw the sheep back into the field. And they're like cats. They always land on their feet. Or if they don't, they're very well padded, so it was fine. And I returned this lost sheep to the fold, and I got back in my car, and I was just, very amusing. And then I drove all the way to work. And for me, that was a really interesting visual and very direct visual that God wanted me to be involved in getting lost sheep back into the sheep pen, if you like. Those that are lost, those that are wandering away, whether they like it or not, I'm going to grab them and I'm going to put them back in the sheep pen. And that's basically why I'm so gentle in my style of ministry. But it felt like this was a very specific calling to me, and that was part of the decision-making process for me actually to be pursuing getting a seminary degree and then going into full-time ministry. So be careful if you are considering full-time Christian ministry. Be careful if you pray for a sign, because you never know what might happen. We are in week 4 of a series called DiscipleSHIFT. You'll notice we've got the gear sort of symbol here. Somebody pointed out to me that there's no reverse on this gear shift, and I'm like, absolutely not. No turning back in this church. There's no reversing. There's no going in reverse. We're just plowing ahead. So we are in week 4. And week 4, we're talking about being committed to the mission of Jesus. So just as a reminder, in case this happens to be your first week here, of the ground we've covered the last 3 weeks, our definition of discipleship was this. A disciple is someone who follows Jesus. A disciple is someone who is being changed by Jesus. A disciple is committed to the mission of Jesus. So this obviously begs the question, what is the mission of Jesus? And we get a very good introduction to that in the Gospel of Luke, chapter 4, where really Jesus declares his manifesto. He announces to the people in a sermon what he's here to do. So if you have a Bible with you or a Bible app, or you can look on the screen behind me, this is how it reads, Luke 4, 18 to 19. The Spirit of the Lord is on me, because he has anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim freedom for the prisoners and recovery of sight for the blind, to set the oppressed free, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor. So this is good news to the poor, or as Matthew tells it, to the poor in spirit, to those who recognize that they have a need for God in their life. Now, in this congregation, there will be some of you who recognize this very early. Maybe at age 3 or 4 or 5, you came to this realization, for years I have wandered deep in sin and I need the Lord. And that taking the extra cookie, you were done with that sort of business. And you recognized that you needed God. For others of you, it was a much more difficult and hard path. You went through some experiences, you tried some things in life, and they didn't satisfy, or they took you down a wrong road, and you eventually hit rock bottom. And in that point of desperation was when you realized, I need God. However it is, we get to this point where we realize, I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired, and I need something different in my life. Jesus came to bring good news to you, that it doesn't have to be this way, that you were destined for something more and something different than the life you have now. I remember when I got to that point, I was 20 years old, and I was working in real estate, and life was sort of going fine, but still I sensed this emptiness inside me that there was something missing, and I couldn't really work out what it was. To use the words of Neo in The Matrix, it was like a splinter in my mind, like something's missing somewhere. And I didn't know what it was until I encountered the gospel of Jesus Christ, and then it made sense. Jesus came to proclaim freedom for the prisoners. And some of us, we have something that makes us feel trapped. Maybe it's an addiction, maybe it's a habit or a toxic relationship that you know you should leave, but you don't. Jesus can set you free and break the chains of that. Jesus came to bring recovery of sight to the blind. Now, that in Jesus' ministry actually meant recovery of physical sight to those who were physically blind, and that does still happen today, but more often we interpret this in the sense of people being spiritually blind. And maybe some of you feel that way this morning, that you have lost your way, that life is a fog and you don't know which direction you're going. You're stumbling around. You stumbled in here this morning. I'm very glad that you did. I hope people made you feel welcome. But trying to make sense of it all. And Jesus can bring light to the darkness. And we understand that life doesn't need to be confusion and chaos. Jesus came to set the oppressed free. Perhaps this morning you're feeling oppressed by sin, oppressed by evil, both inside and outside of yourself. We like to think of evil as something out there. We think of bad guys and evil terrorist organizations. Like that is evil. But in those moments, in the quietness of our heart, when we are honest with ourselves, we know that there is evil in us too, that we are capable of great evil. Solzhenitsyn, the great Russian writer, said that the line dividing good and evil doesn't go between nations and states, but goes right through the center of every human heart. And we know the truth of that. We know that the thoughts we sometimes have. Yeah, have you ever had people say, wouldn't it be great if we could read each other's minds? I'm like, God, no. Like, please, God, no. I mean, the reason we censor is for a very good reason, right? Because sometimes we have horrendous thoughts and completely inappropriate thoughts and ungodly and evil thoughts. And, by the grace of God and by the careful conditioning of society, we do not act on those thoughts. But we know that the potential is there in us. Jesus came to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor. What's interesting about this is the original quote that Jesus is quoting here finished with, and the day of the judgment of our God. And Jesus cuts it off at the year of the Lord's favor because he came not to declare God's judgment, but to proclaim God's favor upon us. Because he knew that he was going to take the judgment of God on himself on the cross, and we would not have to experience that. All that would be left for us is God's favor. I think it's a beautiful thing to understand that God is for you and not against you. And I don't think that was the God that I was always introduced to when I was growing up. I went to a different kind of church when I was growing up, and God was sort of scary. It was a thunderbolt and lightning God. Any of you been introduced to that God? Thunderbolt and lightning, very, very frightening thing. Galileo. So, but this is a very channeling Bohemian Rhapsody there. But this idea that God can be this very terrifying and scary deity that wants nothing more than to smite us. You did something wrong, smite. But then this idea that I was introduced to later, that God is for us and not against us, that there is no condemnation for those who are in Christ Jesus, that nothing can separate me from the love of God that is in Christ Jesus, that God is so very for us that, as the song said, he is a good, good Father and he loves us. It's very liberating to my soul. God does have a righteous anger against sin, but that was poured out on Jesus on the cross. So we can run unafraid, unashamed, with confidence into his arms, knowing that we'll be welcomed and loved. In 1 John, there's another description given of the mission of Jesus, and it's this: the reason the Son of God appeared was to destroy the devil's work. So what is the devil's work? We get a pretty good summary of that in John 10, chapter 10, where Jesus refers to the devil as the thief. And he says this, "The thief comes only to steal and kill and destroy. I have come that they may have life and have it to the full." So the enemy of our souls, the devil, comes to steal your joy, to steal your hope, to steal your laughter, to steal your smile. Everything that is good, he comes to steal it away. And he comes to kill your dreams, to kill your belief that something can be different than the life you have now. And he comes to destroy your sense of purpose, your destiny, your sense of connection with God. That's what he wants to do. But Jesus came that you may have life, and not just mere existence, where you're like, oh, another day. But life to the full, where you can wake up with this sense of exuberance, this sense that Gary spoke about this morning, that worship is already happening, and we stand up and we just join in this great throng of worship that the whole earth is engaged in. So that's the mission of Jesus, and that's the mission of the church. So here's the question, church. Are we as a church, as individuals, life-giving or life-draining for others? If the city of San Jose was an entity, would we be able to say Central Christian Church is a good thing for the city of San Jose? I hope we would. Do we build hope into people's lives? Do we communicate a belief that they can change, that life can be good, that God is not done with them, that he has a future that is good, that he is for them and not against them? Is that what people sense our God is like? Or is what they get from us judgment, disapproval, distaste? Jesus summed up his mission like this: "For the Son of Man came to seek and to save the lost." He was not passive about this. When God saw the sorry state of humankind, he didn't just look down from heaven and say, "What a shame. Guess it didn't work out with Earth, over to the Martians." God just didn't give up on us like that. But he took action. He sent his own Son. So this is not a matter of indifference to God. This is life and death, flesh and blood. He was willing to put everything on the line that you and I might return to relationship with him. So his mission, and logically our mission, is to move people from brokenness to wholeness. From brokenness to wholeness. And people, if they are honest with you, will admit that there is brokenness in them. Many of us have experienced brokenness in our lives, whether that was our upbringing or our relationships, or maybe some stuff happened in our life. Maybe somebody we loved died way too early and we're broken in that regard with grief. Jesus came to move us from brokenness to wholeness. And this is not just about our spiritual life. We had a meeting here on Friday night, a healing prayer and worship evening. Some of you came to that. And it is a beautiful thing to watch people coming forward with real emotional pain and injury and hurt, and to just be prayed for, to be ministered to, and to see emotional healing take place. And for sure, physical healing actually does take place sometimes at these things too, but a lot of the time it's emotional and spiritual healing that takes place in those evenings. And it's just amazing to see God through his Spirit interacting with people and moving them towards wholeness. So that's the mission. How did Jesus carry out his mission? And 3 quick points on that. He seeks the lost. He invites and includes. He lives it out. He seeks the lost. He invites and includes. He lives it out. And I think there's a great story in the Gospel of Luke chapter 19 that demonstrates this beautifully. So I'm just going to read that. Luke 19, it's the story of Zacchaeus. And this is how it goes. Jesus entered Jericho and was passing through. A man was there by the name of Zacchaeus. He was a chief tax collector and was wealthy. He wanted to see who Jesus was, but because he was short, poor man, he could not see over the crowd. So he ran ahead and climbed a sycamore fig tree to see him, since Jesus was coming that way. When Jesus reached the spot, he looked up and said to him, "Zacchaeus, come down immediately. I must stay at your house today." So he came down at once and welcomed him gladly. All the people saw this and began to mutter, "He has gone to be the guest of a sinner." But Zacchaeus stood up and said to the Lord, "Look, Lord, here and now I give half of my possessions to the poor. And if I have cheated anybody out of anything, I will pay back 4 times the amount." Jesus said to him, "Today salvation has come to this house, because this man too is a son of Abraham. For the Son of Man came to seek and to save the lost." Zacchaeus has some issues. He is a chief tax collector, so he works for the IRS. Is there anybody here who works for the IRS this morning? Anyone who's willing to admit that they work? No, I didn't think so. So he works for the IRS, but this is not just the normal IRS, which people aren't very much in favor of generally, but this is the Roman IRS. So the land of Israel and Palestine has been taken over by the occupying Roman forces, and what Rome came is they brought peace and taxes, and they wanted to recruit local people to collect the taxes because they would know who had the money, right? So they recruited from amongst the Jewish people tax collectors, and they were hated collaborators with the Romans. They were fleecing their own people. The Romans would say, this is how much tax you have to collect. Anything extra that you manage to collect, you can keep. So there was a very strong incentive to cheat people as a tax collector. So those people were pretty much despised. In fact, they were usually grouped together with just conscious of children in the audience, ladies of the night, and other sinners and, evil people. Tax collectors were included in that group. So he's a tax collector. Not only is he a tax collector, he's a chief tax collector, which means he has rounded up a gang of his other horrible friends to also become tax collectors, and he is skimming off the top of their profits as well. So you can imagine he's not very popular amongst his people group. He's not exactly going to get a Christmas. Yes, this is after Christmas. He's not going to get a Christmas card from his people. So he's not a good guy. He's got the trappings of success. He's very wealthy, but he knows that something is missing. He would fit very well in Silicon Valley. But perhaps you know this feeling that the outside looks good, but inside something is missing. The spiritual part of your life is unsatisfied. The French philosopher Pascal talked about this God-shaped hole that we all have in our lives. And we can try and cram other things in it, serial relationships, money, success, power. But in the end, nothing satisfies because we were designed to have this relationship with God. And until God is there, it will not be satisfying. The old church father Augustine said, "Our souls are restless until they find rest in thee." There's an emptiness and a restlessness about us that will only be satisfied when God is in his rightful place in our life. And maybe you this morning have this restlessness of soul. And I'm glad you're here because Jesus has something to say to you. Or perhaps you're a regular here and you don't have this restlessness of soul, but you know someone like this. Someone in your social circle. Maybe a mother you meet in the school playground as you drop off your kids. Or that guy at work who sits next to you in the cubicle just down the way. Someone in your life that has this deep-rooted unhappiness. And Zacchaeus needed a tree to get to Jesus. Maybe you can be someone who helps others get to Jesus as they see the reality of the changes he has worked in your life. What I find fascinating in this story is that Jesus doesn't preach a sermon to Zacchaeus. Preachers love it when people's lives are changed by preaching. That really validates our existence and what we do on Sunday mornings. But this is not what happens here. What Jesus does is issues an invitation to relationship. He issues an invitation to relationship. There's no gospel presentation. Jesus just wants to be with him. In fact, he says, "I'm going to eat dinner at your house tonight." And in that culture, table fellowship, agreeing to have a meal with each other, was a sign of close association. It was like, I don't mind being associated with this person. And when you think of it, Jesus, who is the poster boy, the Jewish rabbi, the great teacher, is now going to associate himself with a hated Roman collaborator, tax collector. This is astonishing and would not have gone down well with the crowds. But he offers the power of presence. Can you offer that to someone? Just to be with them? There's an amazing power in a calm, non-anxious presence. When you carry the peace of Christ with you, it can flow to others and they will feel it. I've been in situations before where people have said, just when you're here with us, it feels more calm. I don't know why that doesn't work at home in my house, but in other places, I can sometimes be a bringer of calm because I think Christ is in me. But Jesus invites and includes. Do we do that in our lives? There's a temptation. Many of us are busy people, and in Silicon Valley, that's exacerbated because couples, often both have to work. So life gets very busy. There's just enough time to take care of your own business without being interested in anyone else's life. But Jesus invites and includes. Do we invite others and include them in our lives? Do I invite people in to see my marriage? Do I invite people in to see my parenting? Lord help me. Do I invite people in to see my friendships, how I spend my time and my money, to see how Christ influences everything? What we see here, a simple reality, is that Jesus is spending quality time with sinners. Are we? Are we spending quality time with sinners? There's a sad statistic that after 3 years of becoming a Christian, most Christians have no non-Christian friends. They've surrounded themselves with the holy huddle, and there's not really that many environments in which they can be salt and light. And I believe that we do need non-Christian friends, not as a project, because we would never want people to feel that they're a project for us. You know, my pastor said, I've got to convert somebody, so I'm sorry, but you're it. So tell me your story, because I need a spiritual scalp by next week. Otherwise, I don't know what they're going to do. You know, this is a horrible, horrible way of looking at evangelism. And I remember in my young days as a Christian coming into church and hearing about something called friendship evangelism, which is when you specifically befriend someone in order that they become a Christian. And I always had this question in my mind, what if they don't? Like, how long do you give it? Like, I'm going to be a friend to you, I'm going to love you, I'm going to be there for you. But if you don't become a Christian, after a while, I'm just going to drop you because, come on, seriously, I'm going to find someone more easily convertible. And that's just very cynical and very project-oriented, and I don't like it. I think Christians should be friendly people because we have the love of God in us. The love of Christ compels us. We are commanded to love others. And if I love someone else as a friend, then what I want for them in their life is the best. I hope to be a force for good in their life. I hope they are better for knowing me. And what I want for my friends is the very best that life has to offer, which I believe includes God, includes a relationship with Jesus. And so it's not some sort of sneaky shell game where I'm going to pretend to be your friend only insofar as I can get you to become a Christian, then I'll move on to another project. Or if you're really tricky and resistant to the gospel, I'm going to move on to another project. But no, I love you as my friend, and I want the very best for you, which includes a relationship with Jesus. And even if you never come to Jesus, I'm still going to love you and stay in relationship with you and keep praying for you. And that's the way it is. That's the way it is. So there's nothing sneaky about that. There's no hypocrisy, no con game going on. It's I love you and I want the best for you, and I believe that includes a relationship with Jesus. Now, Jesus' very presence convicts. He doesn't even have to give a gospel presentation before Zacchaeus is repenting and changing his way of life. It's relationship first, not confrontation first. We may need to be more explicit than Jesus, not in the sense of you need to sort yourself out, but in the sense of Jesus has so much more for you. So seeking and saving are clearly priorities for Jesus. Are they for us? Are we looking for opportunities to be with those who need Jesus? Now, I know this can be intimidating because some of us think, well, what if I do befriend someone who doesn't know Jesus and they start asking me all these tricky questions? What am I going to do then? Like, did Adam have a belly button? Did Adam have a belly button? Did Eve have a belly button, for that matter? No. Did their children? How many angels can dance on top of it? And all this stuff, it honestly doesn't matter that much. And the science and evolution debate, what if they ask me about dinosaurs? What am I going to do then? Then I'm really in trouble. So we have all these intimidating fears about, well, if I start talking to someone, what if they have tricky questions I can't answer? You know what? Don't worry about that initially. Just be with them. Let them see the reality of Christ in your life. And if they've got tricky questions, Gary is always available to answer those questions. There are plenty of books and resources that you can steer them to. But honestly, the most powerful objection that people have against Christianity is not usually an academic objection. It's just that they don't know any good Christians, because Christians are keeping quiet about their Christianity, or they're not representing Jesus well. But if they meet a good Christian who genuinely loves them and who demonstrates Christ in their life, that will blow past most of the academic arguments and objections that they may have about Christianity. You just simply need to be with them and let them observe your life. So, here's the question. What do I need to shift to be committed to the mission of Jesus. And I want to suggest 3 shifts to you this morning. The first one is this, a shift in mindset. I am a missionary. We are all called to share Jesus, to give a reason for the hope that is in us. This is not the call for a chosen few. You don't need to cross an ocean. You don't need to have a sheep appear in the middle of the road in order to become a missionary. But you are God's agent in place right where you are. I think it's very interesting that we adopt a missionary mentality when we go on a mission trip. Have you ever noticed this? That we're very focused on the possibilities of sharing Jesus with someone when we go on a missions trip, but we somehow forget that. I mean, I've been on missions trips to Mexico, from my church in Southern California, and it's amazing how zealous we are, because we'll all be on the bus and we'll pray before we get on the bus, and then we have to have a rest stop on the way down where we're going to stop for to pee and have a taco and washing hands in between, very important. We'll stand in a prayer circle as we go, Lord Jesus, as we go to the bathrooms right now, as we go to the taco stand, reveal to us, Lord, who needs to hear your words, show us who we can talk to. And we're like so zealous, and then we get back to Southern California and we walk into our office, which has 97% non-Christians, and we're like, oh, well, better get on with my work. Now, I know some of us have restrictions about how we can share, but it's about mindset, isn't it? Why should we be any more of a missionary in Mexico, which I'm guessing has a higher percentage of Christians than Silicon Valley? Silicon Valley is 3%, by the way. This is the least churched area in all of the United States. Did you know that? So you people are strategic and key, and you are missionaries in place. And it's all to do with mindset. If you just say, well, I've got my ticket to heaven, I'm all right, so let's just move along, that's not going to reach Silicon Valley for Jesus. But to understand that you are a missionary in place, you are an oddity in Silicon Valley. You say, but I'm a geek. You're still an oddity if you're a geek and you're a Christian. Because Christians are an oddity. They are a rarity. They are an unusual thing in Silicon Valley. 3% of people in Silicon Valley go to church. So you are a missionary in place, whether you like it or not, because you are surrounded by people who do not know Jesus. But it's about the missionary mindset. I'm going to show you a video now. It's a video about Scott, our worship leader's parents, and it's about something they did in Canada, which also needs Jesus. All right, so let's watch that video.
Our story actually begins before we moved down here to San Jose. Adele and I came from Canada in 1997, and we came with our 3 of our teenage sons. But before that, we had been attending a church in Winnipeg, Canada, and we were approached one day by a member of the church that we really didn't know. And he had approached us because he knew that we had been moved into a newer area where there really wasn't a church. And he knew we were kind of connected with a lot of families. And so he approached us and came up with the idea that, what do you think about starting up a church? And the only time we could meet would be Sunday evenings. So we thought about it, we prayed about it, and we decided it sounded like something that the Lord was leading us to try out.
So we thought, we were both nervous because we didn't know how do we go about approaching some new friends and friends that we just had recently got to know to invite them to church. And we decided to start with our son's hockey team. He was on a team and there was 17 players on that team. And so we invited those families to come to our first Sunday of church. Well, 13 of those families out of the 17 came, and we were blown away. We never expected it. And God used that time because we landed up inviting friends from the daycare center that I operated, and some of those families came. And then
a couple of our close neighbors that we really didn't have a big connection with, a couple doors down, but they came because of the invitation.
And even from the boys' soccer team. And so we just used the people that were around us. We were involved with all 4 of our sons' teams and used that to share to the families.
Before we knew it, though, we had over 100 people coming to our home Sunday evenings, and started a youth group and a pastor, a lay pastor.
We hired a pastor a year later.
And then all of a sudden we also had like church picnic. So we had a real neat kind of church growing. And One of the most exciting things to me, though, was when we saw some of those people get baptized in our pool.
You know, it starts where you are, your kids' teams, your neighborhood, that God has placed in our life around us, whether it be at your workplace or, maybe it's the Starbucks you go to each day. Somebody is there that needs Christ. And are you going to be bold enough to speak up? We're so glad we did. We took the risk. It was scary, but we did it, and lives have been changed for eternity through it. It's so worth it. I can't tell you how much that I would stress to each of you. Be brave enough and just share with those that God has placed in your life.
Yeah, that is awesome. You know, in some ways, it's so much easier to start a church with people you already know. If you go to a foreign country and you've got maybe a week there, you are starting from zero in terms of relational equity with those people. But if you have people who have known you for 6 months or a year or 2 years or 10 years, and you say, hey, we're starting this thing at our house, and I don't know if you'll be interested in it, but I'd love to invite you, and you just see what they say. I think our great temptation is to say no on behalf of people, and that's a terrible mistake to make, because you never know how God has already been working in their life, prompting them, getting them ready. Most people, I would suggest, are more ready than you realize to engage in a spiritual conversation, to find out more about Jesus. Don't say no on their behalf. If they're going to refuse, let them do it themselves. But we already have this mission field around us. The fields are white unto harvest, to quote Jesus. So it's a shift in mindset. The people in Silicon Valley do not need Jesus any less than the people in Mexico or Tanzania or anywhere else that we might think of ministering to. We are all missionaries in a foreign land. This is not our true home. The Bible calls us aliens and strangers here, and if we become too embedded, then we forget our role. The next shift we need is a shift in how I use my time. To seek and to save takes time. We need to intentionally spend time and cultivate friendships with unbelievers. And this may not mean more time, but that I use the time that I have more intentionally. With Earl and Adele that we just heard, they were already in relationship with the parents from their kids' sports teams. This is not going out and finding new people to share with. They were already in these relationships. It's a matter of being more intentional and directed in these relationships that already exist. So at the next sports game, instead of screaming encouragement/abuse at your child for how they're performing, have a conversation with the parent next to you. How are you doing? How are you doing really? Is there anything I can do to help you? You know, this is so surprising to people. We tend to be very insular in our thinking, and when you genuinely offer to serve someone else, to help and serve someone else, that blows them away. And they're like, why would you offer to help me? You said, well, I just want to help you. And maybe at a certain point, Jesus can come into the conversation. But this serving of others is a great key that can unlock their heart to Jesus. And we'll hear a little bit more about that from Mike later on. The third shift that we need is a shift in my heart. A shift in my heart. If we're honest, some of us will say, I really don't care about the fact that my neighbor is going to hell or my co-workers. I'm just busy. I'll just take care of myself, thank you. And I care about the fact that I don't care, because that's a problem, because I should care, and there should be a shift in my heart that moves me to love others enough to want to introduce Jesus to them. We represent the King of all kings. The King of endless love is reaching out to his lost children through you and me. And we need to pray and ask God to give us his compassion for those who don't know him. I did a wedding about 2 months ago. Some people found me through my website and they asked me to perform their wedding. And they were not Christians. And in any case, they were short on time and needed someone, and the previous officiant had fallen through, so I decided that I would help them out. And I got there to this wedding, which was up in San Francisco, and I had forgotten what lostness looks like. The people who were their friends who arrived before the wedding started were hungry because it had gone over time. We were now past lunchtime and there wasn't any food, so they just cracked open some bottles of alcohol just to get some calories from the alcohol. At least that was the reason given. So people, by the time the wedding started, were already a little bit red-faced and merry, shall we say. And the bride arrived and she was trying to connect by Skype with her family that was somewhere else in the world, and she was smoking and cussing and drinking, and I was thinking, wow, you're just about to make these sacred promises to one another, and this is the sort of stuff that is coming out of your mouth. And I was shocked, honestly, and I realized, I'm leading a pretty sheltered life these days. I mean, you're nice people. I mean, you are nice people, with a very few notable exceptions. You are nice people. And I lead a pretty sheltered life, and I need to get out there, is what I realized. And I actually did have one good conversation at that wedding with someone who basically said, well, what church are you from, and what good does your church do in the world? And I love that question, because then I can talk about, well, we're involved in a project to help set young girls free from trafficking in Cambodia. And like, oh, well, you can't really argue with that, can you? So, I love that question. And we just had this good conversation, but I was just looking around, and my heart went out to these people, because I thought, for them, a good time is getting drunk. And for so many people that are lost, a good time is getting drunk, getting oblivious, casual sex. That's it. That's as good as it gets. And that is so tragic, because God has so much more for us. And honestly, if I just mix with Christians, if I just stay in the holy huddle, I forget what lostness looks like, and I don't have a very compassionate heart. A church is not a cruise ship. Christianity is not a cruise ship where we get our ticket, we get on board, we enjoy the eat all you can, make yourself sick buffet, and we just sail on by. But the church is a lifeboat. And when you are rescued by someone on the lifeboat, you don't just become a passenger on this lifeboat. You become part of the crew. Because the need is too great and the time is too short. We cannot have passengers on the lifeboat. If you ever visit a lifeboat and check it out, you'll see that there are not passengers, there are not observers. It is crew. And if you are here as part of this church, I want to declare to you with no apology, you are part of the crew that God has ordained to reach down and rescue others. If you're just here to be a passenger, you're probably at the wrong church. There's some great churches I won't recommend any churches to you, but we are a church that is deeply involved and interested in reaching Silicon Valley for Jesus Christ, because people need to know Jesus. They need Jesus in their lives, and we have a responsibility to be on the edge of the boat, reaching down in the water and plucking people out. That's what we're about as a church, that people might come to know Jesus for themselves and experience this abundant life that he has for them. May God give us his heart for the lost, that we might also seek and save, that we might also be committed to the mission of Jesus. Let's pray together. Jesus, thank you so much for your great example, that you came to seek and save the lost. And how easy it would have been to walk on past Zacchaeus, to not even notice this little guy up in a tree, and just to keep going with the crowds, enjoying their adulation. But you have a heart, you have an eye for the individual, for the lost one, for the desperate one. And I pray that you would give us that same heart of compassion for those that don't know you. Lord Jesus, we have so many stories here of how lives have been transformed by you. We will hear more next week as people are baptized. And Jesus, you just long to reach in and give us an abundant life where we know you and we experience your love. Jesus, many of us would confess that when it comes to the lost people around us, we're not that concerned. We're just busy with our own lives, trying to hold our stuff together. But that's not good enough. So I pray, God, for those of us that are complacent or indifferent to the plight of those around us who don't know you, that you would change our hearts, that you would take our hearts of stone and replace them with hearts of flesh, that we might see as you see and have a heart like yours to seek and save the lost. In your name, amen. We're going to take a few moments to pray up front here as we sing the next worship song. If you would like prayer for anything that's going on in your life right now, there will be people here who will be glad to pray for you. If you're a person that says, you know what, I want to care about lost people, but I really don't, and I want God to change that in me, then we would love to pray that through with you as well. So take a moment, let's stand to sing, and we'll have some prayer time.